Hello and welcome back to the Unstuck movement, true testimonies of breakthrough. I am your host, Rob Z. Today we have the incredible Elaine Lankford with us on the podcast. Elaine, I love to dive in right off the bat with a powerful question. And I love just getting to the heart of the matter. And this to me is the best place to start. For you, you had a long-standing career in nursing, but you stepped into a modern day Job season in your life. There was a turning point to help you embrace God's vision for yourself. What was it during this Job season that led you to changing your purpose and your calling and your mission in life?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I had this long-standing nursing career from 1992 to 2008, and I'm a faith-based person from the time I was young, and I felt the call into nursing in sixth grade. Like I can literally tell you the classroom, the chair, the vision out the window when I heard him say go into nursing, and my whole trajectory went there all the way through high school. I prepped for nursing school. And so I enjoyed my career. I started out in oncology nursing and then moved into pain management. And pain management was on an upswing between 2099 to about 2008. And then unfortunately, we had a pendulum swing, back the other way. And so it became very controversial. And unfortunately, during that time, the particular practice that I was in became a target for some political movements that were going across our state. And unfortunately, we were caught up in something that we could not control. And in 2008, the practice was shut down. And so virtually my career stopped. But in the midst of all of that, just within a few months of the practice being closed and facing having to defend myself to our local state board for things that, again, I can stand and say were not true and things that I could not control. My father died within a few months of that process starting. And then within 6 months of that, my husband at 47 was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so within about 12 months, my life was just completely in ashes. And I had not experienced that kind of level of tragedy before then. And so I tell people as a Christian, I was kind of bubble wrapped at that point, had grown up, I had been fine, had no real trials. And then all of a sudden, it was like, God, what are you doing? What has just happened? Just like Job in the Bible.
Unbelievable. So, I was just going through some stuff right now in my personal life. And just this morning, I always go back to this saying because I believe it to be true. Rejoice in the breakdown because the breakthrough is coming. And we're going to dive into that. So we're just going to go deeper into that and how that shaped out, how you managed that, and where the breakthrough came from, because this podcast is all about breakthrough. So I just want to reintroduce people to the platform. The Unstuck movement was to help you find breakthrough in your life, whether that's personally or professionally. Break those chains that have been holding you back. We're sponsored by the Connected Leaders Academy. Make sure you check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Over 450 heart-centered servant leader entrepreneurs from all over the world who help each other grow. And also, I want to encourage you that if you are the expert at what you do, but you want to be the go-to authority in your field, you want to create something that leaves a lasting impact on people's lives, and you also want to make incredible connections personally and professionally that will last a lifetime, I encourage you to launch your own platform. I would love for you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. You can join the wait list right now at robzwentz.com. Today with us is Elaine Lankford, a certified John Maxwell Team member and founder of She Steps Forward International, equipping Christian female entrepreneurs across the U.S. and Africa to launch kingdom-focused ventures. Her work empowers women to turn God-sized dreams into impactful marketplace ministries. So, going back to your story and your Job season of life, Elaine, was it true? Was my statement true? The one that I live by, rejoice in the breakdown because the breakthrough is coming?
Absolutely. Anything that God does and tears down in our life, He's doing for a reason. And normally, when He builds it back better. And so I didn't know that, of course, in 2008, 2009, we were in the worst of it. And I did not know that my Job season would not last just a few weeks, but would last almost 5 years.
Mm.
and that my life would have to be totally reconstructed. But what I found out in my season is that though I know that I live by good standards, ethical standards, and what I was doing in my practice, I had gone all the way up to nurse practitioner, by the way. It's 11 years worth of education over a 20-year course career. Even though I know that I was ethically sound in my practice, what I had done and what God taught me in that season is that I had lost my true identity. See, when we get on our roll and we start gaining those letters and those alphabets behind our name, we sometimes get a little enticed by them. And so I let myself become completely identified by my nursing career.
Mm.
It all went away. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I didn't know how to identify myself. And God was slowly bringing me back to who should have been my first love in the first place, which is Christ. And I know that He was pulling me out of that season so that I wouldn't continue to go down a road that was going to take me into a more worldly pursuits and away from the plan that He had for my life. And so He sat me down. And sometimes He'll do that to us when we don't listen, when we don't catch the signals, when we're not paying attention to what He's trying to do in our life. And so during that time, I had been going to a really good church, and we had started actually going on mission trips to Nicaragua. And we ended up going down there for about 9 years. And that was my first time getting out of country into another culture. And I had the privilege of working with girls in an orphanage there, and then working with their female caregivers there as I traveled down each year. And in the depths of Nicaragua, where it was very quiet, in a very poverty-stricken place of Nicaragua called Puerto Cabezas, I heard God say to me, I need you to go home and raise up my daughters. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like, I was the girl in high school that had just a couple of good friends. I wasn't a big sorority person coming through college or anything like that. And I really didn't understand where He was going with that at first. And so I came home, and what happened was I went back to the church that I was in, and our church had grown from about 400 members to about 1,000. And I looked out one Sunday morning and just realized there was all this wasted potential sitting in the seats. Women who had dynamic stories and circumstances and experiences that they were not using for the kingdom. They were not telling people about that would have been helpful to get someone else unstuck from the places that they were in. And I thought, how can I motivate them? That was the start of it. That was the catalyst. Like, I got your picture, Lord. Now, how do we do this?
Mm. I want to rewind a little bit, going back to how you identify yourself, right? Because I think this is really important, especially people who are stuck and going through that season, that wilderness, the Job season. And you said you couldn't identify yourself anymore, especially when you're so entrenched in something that you did for so many years. I had 20 years in radio broadcasting, and that was my identity, right? And so I did not know who I was outside of that. And I kind of based who I was off of what I thought other people thought that I was, who I thought other people thought that I was. And I didn't know who I was. And God's been teaching me who I am. And I'm curious for you, because I think when people hear that, it's like, finding my identity. And how do you mean that you couldn't identify yourself? I guess that's kind of a vague question, but like in specifics for you practically, what did that crisis look like?
When you get up and you do something every day of your life for a long period of time, when you lean into this is my gifts and talents, this is the area that I should be functioning in, and you become kind of encapsulated in that, you don't think further. You don't allow yourself to dream beyond your capabilities. And so for me, when that moment just kind of stopped on a dime, like I literally sat at home because there was no work for me while I was going through this process, and shortly thereafter for 2.5 years, and just didn't know what to do with myself in the morning. Didn't know. I was so used to getting up at a certain time and going to a certain place and doing certain things. And it was like, what do I do today? But in that time, I was starting to hear a little bit more and starting to journal and starting to try to figure things out, and incredibly isolated during that time, which I think is what's so paralyzing to people when they get stuck, just incredibly isolated. Like, no one's going to ever believe that I was innocent, right? People they're not gonna believe that Elaine didn't do something wrong. That just, I mean, this, you're up against this entity that says that you did so and so, and how do you convince people? And that fear and that isolation just had me paralyzed for a while, and I just could not function um, without doing the things that I was used to doing, without being able to care for people the way that I had always done for 16 or more years at that point.
Yeah, it's a really good way to describe that, because it puts into question your entire routine, your entire day, how you wake up in the morning, and you don't wake up with the same purpose or the same routine. And it throws you for a complete loop. We as humans, we don't do well with change. And so sometimes that change can take a bit to adjust to. And we have to reach out to God and be like, God, how do I readjust in this change? Because I don't know what the heck's going on right now. What would you say to somebody who's going through that wilderness period? It is lonely, and you might even have people around you, right? But I don't know. I think about it a couple of different ways, but like when you're going through something like that, even if people are around you, you still feel completely alone, because nobody can solve it for you. Nobody can fix it for you. You've got to figure it out with God, right? And what do you say to somebody who's going through that? Then maybe they've been in it for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. And because when you're in it, you think there's no end to it, right? You think like, this is never going to end. What do you say to somebody going through that, just to help them move day to day to find a breakthrough?
So I first want to acknowledge that if someone is stuck in that period, that I want to fully acknowledge that it is true. No one exactly knows exactly what you're going through. It's kind of like coming back from war and being a vet. Unless you've been in that war, you really can't understand it. It's kind of like losing a child. Unless you've lost a child, you really can't understand it. And so for me, it was a dynamic situation that very few people had been through. And so what I tell people is that in that, you have to find the way back out. And if you will allow God, He will show you the way back out. And what happens is, especially with Christians, is we come to a faith crisis in these situations. And that was definitely where I was. I was at a crossroads of, will I lean into my faith and believe that this God who says He's my God is my God? Or will I run away from Him and say, no, this Christianity thing doesn't work? That's where I was, at a crossroads, staring at two different directions I could have gone. And I made the decision to lean in. I made the decision that I wanted to know, God, if you say you are who you are, if you can do the things that you say you can do, I need you to show up in my life right now. And one of the things that He did is He pointed me back into service. So what I did for the church that I was at that time is I started going in and I volunteered. And I did something stupidly simple as folding the brochures for the Sunday morning worship service. Every week, going in and helping the secretary and putting those worship folders together brought me back to life. It made me get out of my isolation. It made me get out of my chair at home. It moved me back in the public again. It did surround me with people who cared about me deeply. And that little task I built on week after week until I was doing more and more things in the church again. And then the trips to Nicaragua came up and I was like, I'm there. Send me out country. I'm ready to do something different. And it was that serving of others that I think was the key to pulling me back out of being unstuck. And I want to encourage people, if you're stuck, there's a reason you're in it. Look inside the pain, figure out what the lesson is. God wants you to use that to help pull somebody else out. And when you do that, you will come out as well.
Boy, Elaine, I love that. And you said it perfectly. That is the truth. And it's interesting. I wrote down 3 things while you were saying that. Lean in, take action, be of service. Because when you're in that place, because I've been there too, not in the same situation as you, but in a wilderness, Job kind of season. And you're met with a choice. You can lean in or you can run away, right? And lots of people do run away in that situation. They're like, God, why have you forsaken me? I'm done with you. Are you even real? Those sorts of things happen. And so if you don't lean into God and you don't get into a group, you don't go to church, you don't get around faith-based, people, men and women of God, then you will fall away, most likely. It's really hard to do it on your own in that season. So anyways, I feel like leaning in is super important, even if it doesn't feel like even if you don't feel like you want to, you have to lean in and then take action. So you've got to take some sort of action. You've got to do something because you want to do nothing. You want to like sit there and curl up into a ball and cry, which happens, right? But not all the time. So eventually you got to start taking action. And when you take action, make sure that action is being of service, because also in that place, you want to wallow in your own nonsense, right? You want to wallow in your own thing, and you want people to feel sorry for you, and you want to feel sorry for yourself, but you actually have to go be of service to other people. And then God shows you, and that's the beautiful part. And that's why being of service is so important, because God shows you who you are when you serve others. I had a story about, I tell this story a lot in this podcast. I had a guy on many episodes ago, and he was going to kill himself on Thanksgiving night. He loved Thanksgiving, his favorite holiday, but he had big tragedy in his family, and he was alone in his apartment. He was going to kill himself on Thanksgiving. And the church, I guess, that he belonged to, I can't exactly remember, but a church called him and said, "Hey, will you come down and just help? We need volunteers." So he begrudgingly goes down, and basically he's just ushering people in and getting them their food and sitting them down at the table. And in that course of that night, he felt so overjoyed. And like you said, it was nothing spectacular. He was just serving people. He realized how much he loves serving people, how much he loves communicating with people, and he made connections with people that night, and people who were worse off than he was, right? And it gave him purpose, and it showed him what his gifts are. And when you start to serve other people, that's when you find out what your gifts are. So I love that. You explained it perfectly, enough that I had to write it down, because that's exactly the formula when you are stuck, to get yourself out of that period.
And part of that is because the devil, especially for a child of God, the devil's biggest weapon against us is isolation. Mm-hmm. He wants you to believe that you are alone. And the truth of the matter is, even when we don't have human beings that are in a situation with us, we are never alone. God is always there. And we forget that, because the isolation can be deafening. But when we lean in, when we take action, when we serve, we start to hear that beautiful voice again, and it will lead us all the way back out.
Absolutely. So good. Well said. So real quick, we're going to jump into a 60-second break to shout out the sponsor of the show. When we come back, though, I want to talk about Marketplace Ministries, because I've talked about this before in the podcast, and I think it's really, really important how you can make a big impact and have a ministry in the marketplace in your own personal life. And I want to know what that looks like for you, and how you encourage others to do that. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. Are you struggling to make consistent, valuable content for yourself? Do you want to have an efficient and effective way to create content that attracts the people that you want to connect with in life, the people you want to build relationships with in business? Do you want to be the go-to authority at what you do, at what you're great at? Would it be helpful for you if you had a platform that connects you to incredible people in your industry? The kind of platform that gets you leads and lands you clients without you having to beat down anybody's door or blow up anybody's inbox. Whether you're already creating content or you're desiring to start and it's something that's been kind of burning inside of you for a while, I urge you and encourage you to check out the Pro Podcaster Academy. Get started right now. Join the waitlist at robzwentz.com.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world globally. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, join the Connected Leaders Academy today. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So, Elaine, this conversation's phenomenal. I love this, and I love there's so much proof of getting unstuck. There's so many different ways we can be stuck and get unstuck, but there's a formula to it, and it really is something that we have to lean into. I'm curious, Marketplace Ministries, what does that mean to you in your life? How do we apply that to our lives?
So Marketplace Ministry is a fairly new term, but the depths of it has been going on for a little bit. And for me, what that means is that we are being the hands and feet of Jesus out in the marketplace. We're building businesses, parachurch ministries, and nonprofits that sit outside the four walls of the church to continue the work that Christ has put us here to do.
And so this is, I had a guy on before on the podcast, and their whole mission, they're called Entrepastors, and their whole mission is to get people in. Do you know of Entrepastors?
I do.
Okay. Cool. Okay. And their whole mission is to get the church outside of the four walls, to encourage people in the church to become entrepreneurs, because when you become an entrepreneur, you go out into the marketplace, and then you start to influence people with, being a person of God. You start to influence people with God, and they don't even realize what's happening, right? Instead of drawing them into the church, which can be difficult, you go to them. How do you do this in your own life? What does that look like on a daily basis?
So for me, I've always been a church-based person, and I love the local church, and I applaud the local church. I feel like the local church is there to train us to go out. Now, part of what I learned in my season is I really believe that there are Peters and there are Pauls. There are Peters who are meant to serve the local body, who are meant to be within those four walls carrying out that initiative. But there are Pauls, and we are meant to go out, and we are meant to go far. And I think you first have to be able to identify yourself as a Peter or a Paul. And when you do identify yourself as a Paul, you have to figure out what is that thing that God has called you to do. So for me, it went back to looking at these beautiful women and seeing them and seeing what they could do. And there is a little bit of a barrier within the church. There are some denominations that will limit what some women can do. And I'm not here to push theology one way or the other on anyone. But whether you stay in a church denomination that says that you can be in leadership in that church building, you still have a call in your life. And there's so much to do outside of the four walls. That is not a reason to not get up and go. And so for me, I found that outside of the four walls, which is where I've served all my life. I mean, my nursing career was outside of the four walls, even though I supported my local church. It was an easier transition. And after going through what I went through, I had collected many, many notes of journaling while I was in that period. And I heard God tell me to put it in a book. I'd never written a book. I'd never done that kind of thing before. And the process of putting all of those notes together and putting that together as a book within about 6 months and self-publishing it was my first leap into entrepreneurship. I mean, my nursing career was over, and now I have this great book to try to tell people if they go through a Job moment, if they look like a Joseph, how they can lean into God and how they can get out. And I wanted to get that message out. And I thought, well, now I must be, maybe God's calling me to be the next Beth Moore, right? So obviously he's putting me on some track for something. And so you have to start marketing your book, right? So then I had to learn how to blog and set up a website and how to go around and ask people if I could speak and where to go and sell my book. And that was my walk into entrepreneurship outside of the four walls. And I just really love the connections and things that I was gaining. But then I also had this feeling of, how am I going to bring another woman along? And that's where God started shifting things and moving things along. And in 2019, he gave me an idea for something called the She Steps Forward Conference, which obviously my ministry has carried on that name. And She Steps Forward Conference was meant to be a launching pad. I knew that it was a place that if I gathered enough women, inspired and motivated them, that they would start to see that there was more to their life than what they were doing on the day-to-day and coming into church, checking a box and going home. And so that's where it kind of started. And when I launched that first conference, we had about 50 or 60 women come out. They were super excited. We went through the story of Mary and Elizabeth, which if you really look at that, that is a mentoring type relationship. Mary went to Elizabeth based on what the angel told her, and Elizabeth was able to relate to Mary because here's two women going through something miraculous that nobody else can relate to, right? Cool. An older woman being able to play into a younger woman's life. And that's how we started the movement, and women loved it. And so I will say, God being the God that he is and being the funny God that he is, that first conference was so special because one of our attendees for that conference was actually a lady from Africa. And I don't even know how she found our conference. It wasn't like I had a big website or knew how to really do Facebook ads or any of that kind of stuff. It was a God thing. And when God brings you someone from Africa to your first conference you're launching out, he's up to something really, really special.
When you say that God's a funny God, I love talking about this topic. What do you mean by that?
I mean that God has such a great sense of humor in that, oh, you think this is all there is to it? You think this is all I have laid out for you? Let me just give you a small hint of where we're going with this. And then shifting your world around and just doing something that just blows your mind is the kind of God that he is. And I love that part about God. And I just myself imagine him up in heaven giggling at us at the smallness of what it is that we think he has for our life.
Yeah, seriously. I asked that because recently we had a really funny moment where my wife, we've been married now for about a year, and I recently I've been asking God. I know I'm supposed to be doing more with the Lord, and I've been asking him for months, like, okay, God, you gave me the sign, so what is it? And he's called me into ministry in the sense that I'm going to be giving a message once a month at my friend's church, and this wasn't something that I prompted. It was literally just asked upon me and confirmed through a couple of different things. And my wife goes, I always said, and I always told God I wasn't going to marry a guy in ministry. I was never going to marry a guy in ministry. And I said, well, Sarah, you didn't. When we got married, I wasn't in ministry.
Exactly.
But God's hilarious in the sense that like he played this little trick, right? He knew where it was going, but he honored that she said she wasn't going to marry somebody in ministry, and that she didn't. And so that kind of stuff, just understanding like the humor of God, I think is really, really good, because we tend to take everything so seriously. Good Lord, we can take life so seriously, and I pray all the time. I wish I could that I can see life from God's perspective to take the pressure off, because there doesn't need to be so much pressure. And I can imagine with the things that you're doing and how you're growing, pressure can mount on a regular basis. What do you do to relieve pressure? How do you practically surrender things over to God?
Well, probably the biggest answer to that is to take a breath, slow down, rest, because we get so caught up in the day to day and we're building it for God, and we forget that what he really wants us to do is just be in his presence. He just really wants us to spend some time with him. And when I get all out of line, I know I haven't spent enough time with him. And so one of the things that has kind of happened this past year with the nonprofit, God has been so good. We've grown to a full 9-member board, and we have 7 advisory board members who have come around us, and we are ready for Bear in 2025. But right toward the end of 2024, I just felt this urgency from God that I needed to slow down and take the month of December and really listen for him. And that kind of came in the form of getting in my prayer closet again and taking some serious time and opening up the book and reading it, and not just doing it on my Bible app, but reading actually out of my Bible and just listening for what he wanted us to do. And that's, for me, for someone like me, I'm such a multitasker. That's in my nature. It kind of comes out of my nursing career. It's hard for me to slow down and just stop and do one singular thing and to listen. But when you feel that urge, that's the time to do it. And if you will honor that period, God will just, refresh you and widen the vision and get you ready for the next big thing that he's getting ready to open up and do in your life. And so that's what I would say. Listen for the pause that he wants you to take, because in that is so much goodness.
It's a really good point, because you can feel it throughout the day. I know on every day I can feel it at some point of like, I know I have this next thing coming. I'm thinking right now, as you and I are talking here, like, boy, after this, I got to do this and this and this before I got to go pick my son up and we got to get dinner ready. It's like, but I also feel this calling just to go sit on that chair over there and be quiet for 10 minutes, maybe that'll turn into 20 minutes. Who knows, until my next thing has to be done. And to honor that and to do that on a regular basis is the easy thing and the hard thing to do, because it's super easy to do. I mean, literally sitting and not doing anything is the easiest thing to do. But in the culture we live in, it's the hardest thing to do at the same time. So make your choice. It's easy to do. It's easy not to do. And it also has It's funny how our brains can convince us what a waste of time, right? Because
Yeah, that's where I was getting ready to go.
the things of God seem like a waste of time, and I
Yeah.
find that really it's always God's always the opposite of the world, right? The things taking it easy, resting, spending time with people, being present, those seem like a waste of time. I got to keep moving, but you need to relax and you need to stay calm. So how do you do that with people in your life? I'm curious. You got a lot going on. You're busy. You're helping women grow and do the things that God's calling them to do. How do you make time to connect with people when you're trying to connect with so many people?
So one of the things I think that we do badly sometimes in American culture is we feel because of culture that we have to have a million friends, right? How many friends do you have on Facebook, right? And we don't interact with all of those friends on Facebook, but we believe somehow we're accomplishing something when we have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 friends on Facebook.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is the simple truth that was probably taught to me through my John Maxwell training is to keep your circle small. And the people you surround yourself with should be quality people. And when you surround yourself with quality people and you make room for them in your life, it does something to you to refresh you and to refine you and to strengthen you. And so we have a habit here at our house. Every Saturday night, we make sure we get something from outside to eat or go out to eat. That's our time, of course, for me and my husband. And sometimes our son is there in that process with us. And then during the week, as I'm working through things, my board members who are now my key people, my inner circle of people in my life who are full of godly women and men, when they call and they need something, we take time for each other. And we don't do it just to accomplish things that we're doing for the board. We take time to hear each other's life. What's going on? Can I pray for you today? Can I do a sister check or brother check on you today? Like, what's happening that I need to be helping you with as you're helping in this process? And so we're really becoming a family. And I think if you will just let God surround you and not be scared to keep your circle small and not be so hung up on what culture says is what you need or how many people you need in your life, you will find that you let out a lot of stuff that you don't need and you keep in the stuff that you do need. And so I just keep my circle small. I've always kind of had that habit in life. But I think good leaders and people who are visionaries, it's extremely important that we don't overtax ourselves and try to be all things to all people.
Yeah, it's exhausting, and it's not even practical. There's a Dunbar's number. It's like I don't know, whatever Dunbar's number. It's like we can only really know 150 people well is the number, right? So think about that. If I can really only, and that's like knowing them, not like deep personal relationship, but you know them like fairly well, only 150 people. So less and less and less you can get super close with, and you should really only have, like you said, a very tight circle around you. And it's important. And it's also, I think too, when you own that and believe that's true, then you'll start to recognize where you struggle getting close to people at, right? Because one of the reasons you might not have those super close relationships is because you don't know how to get like vulnerable with people and let people get close enough to you. So God can reveal to you through that, like, here's where you really need to put the work in to build those relationships. When we talk about leadership, I talk about leadership all the time, being a leadership coach. You're John Maxwell certified, obviously a leadership coach. There's biblical leadership that I believe trumps traditional leadership. And traditional leadership is just like a tiny version of what biblical leadership is. What does biblical leadership mean to you? How can we be more biblically leading people in our lives compared to what traditional leadership might look like?
Absolutely. So we definitely consider She Steps Forward International a faith-based organization. And what we mean by that is that we take on what we're doing from a faith-based lens, and everything we do has to line up with scripture. Every aspect that we say we believe in or that we need to do needs to somehow line up with scripture. We have a really great team member that has something called Wrap Yourself in the Word, and her whole focus is to teach people how you wrap things around the Word, and that has to do with writing, reading, applying, and praying. And so we've taken upon ourselves, especially in our organization, to just make sure that everything we're doing is lining up. God has been the ultimate and is the ultimate creator. And our creator wants us to create, but if we watch his pattern of creation, we start picking up on his principles of how it works. And kingdom building is so much more exciting than regular cultural building. You just can't make this stuff up. Like, read the Bible. Like, you can't make it up. And so I think there's some really great stuff in there that gives us the boundaries that we need. And as Christians, we have to be sensitive to God's boundaries. The world will tell us we shouldn't have boundaries. We should be able to do anything we want to do. But they're boundaries. And when we honor God's boundaries, which were put there to protect us, not to keep us from doing fun stuff, but to protect us, we become better in the process. And what we build is not built in vain.
That's really good advice. And I love wrap yourself in the word. WRAP, the acronym: writing, reading, applying, and praying. That is phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Like, wrapping yourself in the word of God. I'm getting so many nuggets here.
I want to give a shout out then to Joni Rosebrock, who sits on the She Steps Forward board, and that is her ministry. Wrap yourself in the word.
Yeah, that's really, really good, because to make sure that you're doing the right things because we can just start doing, right? Especially as entrepreneurs, you just start doing. It's like, I got to do something. I got to do. And so you'll just decide and do. But did God, ordain that? Did he give you the confirmation to do that? Is he giving you the go ahead to do that? And the only way to really find out is to know the word, to sit with him, and to wrap yourself in it, to write about it, to apply it to your life, to pray about it. That's really, really powerful. I love that. I want to make sure that people know that they can get your Launch Your Dream 5-day challenge, right? So the free She Steps Forward Launch Your Dream 5-day challenge. You can get that at shestepsforward.pages.co/5-day challenge waitlist. If you're watching, you can see the link at the bottom of the screen, but they should just go to your website and check that out. What can they expect from that 5-day challenge?
So one of the things that She Steps Forward International is doing is we are targeting aspiring Christian female entrepreneurs. And we want to help those that are on the ground level trying to jump into entrepreneurship, be successful in their businesses, ministries, and nonprofits. But we also want to teach them from a biblical, faith-based lens. And so in our 5-day challenge, we're not going to give just the typical practical business guidance, but we're going to look at it from God's lens. And what are the things that we need to learn? Like, how do you be a CEO and from the God kingdom mindset? What does that look like? How do you wrap your vision, mission, and values in his word? How do you rest and understand the boundaries that God has given you? How do you network build in a kingdom way? And lastly, how do you get into a supportive network that truly understands the lens from which you are trying to build and can support you? And that is our 5-day challenge.
I love it. It's so important, especially when you're getting into entrepreneurship, because so many times, and I know I did this when I got into my entrepreneurship, 8 years ago, it was to make money. And I was going into something that it was digital marketing. I was acclimated towards, I was good at, but it wasn't where I was supposed to be. And I had to figure that out. Now, it was my launching point to get me out of my job and into my own business. But at the same time, I didn't seek God for it. And I think if I would have sought after God and been like, what do you want me to do? That would have changed things. But I wasn't saved back then. I was still a secular person just trying to like make money and survive, And so it's interesting, as you ask God what to do, and be patient and wait, he'll give you the right things to do, and it will make sense. And it'll also fill you up, right? The things that he gives you don't just bring you success without joy. They bring you joy and success together, which is so important.
I believe it's Matthew 6:33 that tells us, seek ye the kingdom of God first, and all these things will be given to you. Yeah. How backwards is that from culture? Yeah. But this is kingdom wisdom. This is kingdom principle to build upon.
Yeah, it looks backwards to the world. It's amazing, but it's not actually. The world is backwards from how we should actually do it. And I want to encourage everybody once again, if you want to be the authority in your space and you want to launch your platform, join our wait list at robzwentz.com. Elaine, this has been a wonderful conversation. So glad that I met you. Anything that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
I just want to tell women that there is space for you, that there's a purpose for you. And if you are a faith-based Christian woman that is looking to build that business, ministry, or nonprofit, and you need a really good sisterhood to fall into, we are here for you and we are ready to serve.
Amazing. I'm going to close this in prayer. I feel like that's the right thing to do. Lord, I thank you today for Elaine and incredible connections. And I love, God, how you bring people into our lives that we need to meet. And that I pray right now, the people who are watching this, the women who see this, or the men who see this and have the women in their lives that would benefit from knowing Elaine, I pray those connections are made right now. Those divine appointments are set up. And I just pray for the continued success of She Steps Forward, of what Elaine does, and just for her ministry, for her life, for her business, for her family. I pray blessings over her. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you again in the future, I'm sure, because I just love having these conversations. But I want to thank you for being here today. This is another incredible, true testimony of breakthrough. This has been the Unstuck Movement.